Welcome to Simply by Grace, a podcast of Grace Life Ministries with founder and director Dr. Charlie Bing. This podcast and other helpful resources can be found at our website, gracelife.org. Now, here's Dr. Bing.
Well, we're here again, and we're going to share another grace story with you in our series called Grace Stories. I hope you've been listening to some and sharing those with others. But if not, this is a good one to share. I'm talking to actually my pastor. His name's Gary Armstrong, and we'll let him tell a little bit about his background. He's married to Shayla and has 3 boys and lives here in Burleson, pastoring Burleson Bible Church. So anyway, welcome, Gary, and tell us where you were before you came to Burleson in ministry.
Thank you, Charlie. Good to be on with you today. Prior to answering the call to come to Burleson Bible Church, I was serving as the associate pastor at New Braunfels Bible Church in New Braunfels, Texas, serving alongside Phil Congdon. And it's a real blessing there, about 5 years there. Prior to that, I was a senior pastor at South County Bible Church in St. Louis, Missouri. And so we were there about 9 years, and just various other, couple other ministry positions prior to that, a little bit in California, and a little bit in the Atlanta area as well, some church planting and various things like that. So,
with all that ministry experience, people might be tempted to think you were born of immaculate conception.
Yeah, well, if they just meet me, we will eliminate all those suspicions right away.
Now, sometimes people think that about pastors, they think they're squeaky clean.
Oh, yeah.
And they can't imagine that they have a past.
Yeah.
I have a past, you have a past. I think we all have a past. But so let's talk a little bit about where are you originally from?
I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana. So born and raised there.
Mm-hmm. And you went to public school?
Not until 6th grade. I was raised by Christian parents. They were fundamental Baptist, and so we grew up in the Fundamental Baptist Church, the GARBC, and so, but I had a really good upbringing and raised in church. We lived at the church Sunday morning, Sunday school, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Grew up in Awana, and went to Christian school as well through the church. So, private Christian education up until our family moved when I was around 11-ish years old, and that's when I first started going to public school.
Okay. Where did you go to school before? Christian school?
Yep, Christian school, Eagle Hill Baptist Church and School in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Mm-hmm. So, you had a lot of background in the Bible from church, but Awana makes you memorize a lot of verses and so forth. So you had all that guidance, and the scriptures tell us that if you raise up a child in the way he should go, he will not depart from it.
Yes.
Did you ever depart from that way?
I did. I certainly did. And but I'm thankful for the foundation that was laid for me, and it played a major role in my life later. But yeah, definitely parted from that. Became a prodigal starting in my early teen years. Started to really wander from fellowship with God.
Well, how exactly did that happen? Did you have people in the church that were your compadres in mischief, or did you go outside the church group of friends?
Yeah, well, no, it was connections made in youth group was the means, I guess, to lead me down that path, so to speak. But there was a lot of factors involved in my wandering, the world, the flesh, and the devil, as they say. But there were some kids in youth group. In the back row. It's where we sat, the back row, and that's where I was invited to my first rock concert, and but at the time we had just moved back to Indiana. We spent a year in Illinois, but starting a new church, new community, new school, and so, like a lot of teenagers, you just want to be accepted into some sort of circle of friends. I didn't know a lot of folks, so, and I was starting to have a little bit of a rebellious streak, I guess you could say. I had an older brother that influenced me with drugs a little bit, starting around age 13. And so all these things were at play in my heart and life at the time. And I didn't really understand what it meant to really walk in fellowship with God at that age. I knew Jesus. I became a believer around 10 years old at summer camp, but something else that happened shortly after my salvation was when we moved to that new location in Illinois. I also became the victim of a predator in our neighborhood, and so I was sexually abused.
At what age?
I was about 11 years old.
Oh my goodness.
When that began, and that went on for the next few years.
Oh my goodness.
And so, as a young believer, when you have things like that happen to you in your life, you don't know how to process that.
So you did not speak of that to anyone?
Never told anyone, not until later.
Threats made on you by this predator?
Nope, never any of that.
Just the shame or something?
Yeah, a lot of guilt and shame and just uncertainty. You're not mentally, emotionally, spiritually even developed, I think, at that age to understand what do you do with something like that and how do you process that. And so, all of that was at play. And so when you add that to now we've moved again and we're back to a new location, but you have this history of this trauma for the last couple of years. And so, man, just,
Yeah, and those years, the early teen years are difficult years for anybody.
Right.
You're trying to figure out who you are, and you're being moved around to a whole new crowd and so forth. So
yeah, it was tough, a tough transition.
And you went back to the original church you had grown up in?
Well, no, we had moved back to a suburb of Indianapolis, a place called Brownsburg, Indiana. And so it was a similar church, though, same denomination.
What was the environment in the church like? Was it kind of some of these fundamental churches, I know, they're great churches, great people, but some of them might emphasize external things, works, how you dress,
right,
how you behave, what kind of music you listen to.
Oh, yeah.
Were you feel like you were judged in those areas?
Well, looking back, absolutely. And that was the type of churches that we attended were the fundamental conservative Baptists. So, yeah, the Christian life was about what you looked like, what you did or didn't do. And so we were told, growing up that there was certain music that you didn't listen to. Your hair couldn't be a certain length. It had to be off the collar and, and off the ears. And
off the ears.
It was really about appearance and, off the ears too.
Yeah, from my Bible college, off the ears.
Yeah. So I think I learned that, as a kid, that if you do the right things and look the part, then you're doing the Christian life the right way. Mm-hmm. So more of that after we moved back, similar church. I don't know that it was emphasized a lot, but looking back, I can see how that was a priority for a lot of folks that went because, they dressed to the nines at church and it was all about formality and things like that.
But still good people, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was great. Great people, well-meaning, and still have a lot of friendships. I still am friends with my youth pastor from back then who really did minister to me through that time. But.
Okay. Well, raised in a good church with a strong Bible background, walk us down your prodigal path.
The prodigal path. Yes.
The sexual abuse surely must have confused you quite a bit, but I don't know how that might have played in. But how did that resolve, by the way?
I got old enough, it went on for a few years, more infrequently. But when you get to be the age of 13 and you start to realize, okay, this is totally not right, and I can do something about it, and found my voice and just put an end to it, and I think I kind of made my own threats, to keep that person away. So I'm thankful for that, and then was out from under that part of my life.
Yeah, it's always tragic to hear that. People have to go through that when they're innocent, unsuspecting, and naive about things like that. And these predators just they get my goat. But anyway, let's not dwell on that.
Yes.
So where did life take you in your teenage years?
So just my my church experience, youth group experience, what I always say that I didn't understand was I was never really discipled, and I didn't understand the importance of nurturing my fellowship with God. I didn't read the Bible really, didn't pray much as a teenager. I just didn't see a need. I thought, I have a church and I have youth group and community of sorts, and I'm just a Christian. It's just the life that I'm living because I was raised to live it this way. And again, the emphasis was always on, as long as you're there, as long as you look the part, as long as you're,
As long as you got your ticket to heaven.
Oh yeah,
that's
fire
the important
insurance
thing.
was
So
in place.
You often hear the gospel preached every week, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it doesn't go much deeper than that.
Yeah, it was a big part of my life that was missing. So when the challenges started to come, the temptations, actually I kind of look at it as the spiritual attack on me and my life, because I believe at shortly after my salvation, the following year of camp, I believe God called me to ministry. I felt a real sense of God telling me that He wanted to use me in my life in full-time ministry. As a young age, and I didn't know at the time what all that entailed, but I remember telling my mom what had happened, and I was truly convicted and convinced of it, and it's never left me. Mm-hmm. So shortly after that, that was when we moved, when all of the abuse happened, and moving back then, and the other influences, and so I really see a lot of that as spiritual warfare that Satan wanted to use sinful people and circumstances in my life to cause me to veer from that, from God's purpose for my life in that way. Mm-hmm. And so,
what form of veering did that take in your life? What form was the veering?
I think it was a hardened heart that got increasingly hardened towards God and things of God. You start to question why things happened to you, and where was God, and then not really pursuing God or the things of God, wanting to live the Christian life. And then the influence of the world that's even in the church, and the worldly teenagers that they seem to be having fun, and they seem to be enjoying life and doing the things that teenagers do. And so it appealed to me. And a lot of it with the drugs that I started to experiment with and alcohol, looking back, I can see that was an escape. I was masking a lot of hurt and pain and misunderstanding that I had in my life. I didn't know how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how to run to God with it, because I was never really discipled and understood who God is and how He could help me with these things. So
you self-medicated.
Absolutely.
In a sense. So many people just feel more comfortable high, self-medicated, than dealing with life's issues.
Exactly.
Yep.
I did that.
Painful difficulties.
And the more that you do that early on, it becomes a habit in your life, and you start pursuing that because you long for that release, and to get your mind off of things that trouble you.
Was it drinking and drugs? Was it a party scene too, or what went along with that?
Yeah, just hanging out at school, with the friends that I hung out with, and we're always talking about where the next party is, and just chasing everything, just chasing the acceptance from that peer group, but then the release through the drugs and alcohol, women, chasing girls, and just being promiscuous through my teen years as well. All of it, I think, was trying to fill this emptiness that I had, that I didn't know why it was there necessarily or what to do with it.
Yeah. So the drugs, I've heard part of your story before, got you into trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You want to jump to that, or you got something?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, let's. Because that was, I needed that. I needed to get in trouble. I got in trouble for everything I did. Anyway, as a kid, my friends always seemed to get away with things, but I always seemed to get in trouble. But thankfully, when I was 19, I got arrested for possession and dealing of drugs, LSD and marijuana, 2 different counties. And what had happened was a man that used to sell me and some of my friends drugs got arrested. And so to help himself out, they wired him up and sent him out to go, get us guys, trying to get a bigger dog, I guess. And so I was set up by this informant. But, God used that. And I needed that. I was still using drugs and still, pursuing that life and not really concerned about God or His will for my life. And so that was a major wake-up call when DEA officers show up to your place of business at 19 years old and say, you're under arrest. And they take you away. And at the time, it was 4 felonies. And I think in all, I was facing about 29 years if I were given the maximum security, because these were felonies. They don't mess around with dealing in Schedule 1, which is what they called it, LSD. Times have changed, and certain drugs today.
Some states you can go get some for free.
Right.
Police will give it to you.
Yeah,
maybe.
Right. They aren't as concerned about marijuana today, and it's still illegal, but it was a different time. It was early 90s, and so it was a big deal. It was scary. I was angry. I was cursing out the DEA agents. Why you guys set me up, and they didn't say anything. But that's what I needed. I got locked up in Hendricks County Jail. As I sat there in the holding cell, contemplating what had just happened to me, and it took a few days because my mind was still just foggy with drugs that I'd done. When you're in this drug mindset, I guess, that lifestyle, you're not thinking clearly. You're not evaluating your life. You're just thinking about the next good time or whatever. And I thought I was enjoying life. I had my own job. I had an apartment with a roommate. I was, partying. I even had a fake ID, Charlie, at 19 years old, man. So I was big time. And God put it all to a halt, thankfully, because I was living a dangerous life. I could have very easily died from some of the things I was doing.
By God's grace, I think a lot of people who look back at their teenage years like me and say, they're, but for the grace of God. But so did you bail out of jail and then face a courtroom trial?
I did not bail out of jail because my folks were wise enough to not bail me out of jail. Thankfully, they let me rot in jail. No. Had I been bailed out, I would not have learned what I learned. But they said, hey, you're going to kind of have to work this one out. And so I got a public defender. I just sat there and I just waited for my court date. And so I sat in jail for probably 6 months before I was actually convicted.
Wow.
But I was convicted of a felony. And anytime you're convicted of a felony in the state of Indiana, at least, at the time at least, you had to go to prison. And so I thought at 19, I turned 20 around that same time, that I'd maybe do the rest of my sentence, which they gave me a 6-year sentence. They suspended 4 years. I got a 2-year sentence. You get good time, you get a day for every day, good day. So 2 for 1. So I only had to do a year. I already had half of it done. So I'm thinking I'm going to go to some, Boy Scout camp prison, because, I got a little bit of time. I'm a young guy. I didn't have a previous record. But what I didn't know was that when you have a pending charge and you're convicted of a felony, you get sent to a maximum security prison. I didn't know that at the time. I was still waiting to be arraigned on the other charges that all kind of came at the same time, but they were 2 different counties. So I learned when they woke us up in the middle of the night to take us off to the prison that they were going to send us to. They said, Armstrong, you're going to Westville Correctional Center. And I had already heard stories about Westville. It was a level 4 maximum security prison. And I was shocked. I was scared.
Level 4, that's like the worst of the criminals?
That's the highest.
That's the highest?
Aside from maybe
lowest,
Supermax.
Yeah.
So, wow. man, Charlie, they sent me to a maximum security prison. Here I am, 20 years old, loaded up in a van with other prisoners, driving us out of this maximum security prison. And I remember stepping off that van in shackles, hands and feet shackled, in a white jumpsuit, passing by the yard where all the prisoners were out in the rec time, and seeing guys run up to the fence, catcalling all of us new prisoners coming in, the fresh meat, and just remember thinking, wow, this could be a really scary time.
Yeah, well, you must have been scared.
Yeah, I was scared. You try not to show it. You got to look tough, but there was a very real danger there. So much so that when I first got on to the prison dorm, they put you on a administration and orientation dorm. It's for all the incoming prisoners, and they kind of acclimate you, give you your clothes, and they kind of then tell you what to expect. But there was a man, an African-American prisoner, who was also on that dorm. The other half of that dorm was the honor dorm. It's where the good prisoners got to go because they behaved themselves for long enough. The other half was administration orientation. This guy saw me, and for no other reason other than God moved this man to have compassion on me. He approached me and said, "Hey, you don't need to be here." Because I'm a young-looking person anyway. I was 20 years old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, skinny, guy walking into this maximum security prison. He knew right away, this kid's going to be in trouble. And this man, who had already been in prison for, I think, 17 years at the time, was essentially an attorney. He had studied law. He knew the laws. He knew how to file paperwork. And this man looked out for me, and he filed paperwork to try and get me moved to, out of the prison, which, I never eventually got, but he arranged for me to get sent to a dorm where he knew people that would look out for me and kind of protect me, because the dangers were legitimate. There were guys my age, my size, that got abused, they got beat up, they got raped, and there's no reason that shouldn't have happened to me.
Yeah, God protected you through that.
God protected me.
Yeah, even in prison. Draw us into the world. Not many of us seen the inside of the prison. Been close, but not seen it. And what are you thinking? You're sitting there. Draw us into your world a little bit about what do you think about all day? What do you do? You read books, watch TV, work out? Or is it? Do you have that much freedom?
Oh yeah. There's not much that's structured. So. Just to back up, so the county jail was most of my experience, thankfully, and so that was a lot more confined and limited in what you could do there. But just a few weeks after I was in the county jail, I had a real come to Jesus time in my life, where I just opened up the Bible on my bunk, and I just opened to the Psalms. I hadn't read the Bible in years. And just reading the Psalms, God just broke me. And he just reminded me of his amazing love for me, of his purpose for my life. And I remember feeling as if I had just been slapping God in the face with my life, the life that he redeemed, that he called, to use. And I've just trashed it, like the prodigal son, And so I got really close to the Lord while I was incarcerated. I think
Early on.
Yeah,
first few weeks.
And so that was a wonderful opportunity that God gave me to wake me up to the realization of how I was wasting my life. But we spent most of the days, reading and doing some Bible study and stuff like that. But you just get to hang out with the guys. We played a lot of poker. Man, I am good at poker today.
Oh, yeah.
Played a lot of spades, watching TV, singing, different things. You make friendships in there too.
Yeah. What's the spiritual environment? Do they chaplains visit, prison ministries visit, Bible studies go on?
They do, at least in my experience. So that was a huge part of my experience, was the ministry of the Gideons. They came in to our cell block weekly, and these two Gideons in particular, I connected with, and they prayed with me, and they gave me stuff to read, and they just really ministered to me through that time. But then there's also chapel on Sundays, and so I was a part of the chapel service every Sunday, and we worked out. I got in some pretty good shape, and so there's always things to do to occupy yourself, and you have to, or you'll go crazy in there.
Would you say that your experience behind bars after those first few weeks was a walk with the Lord?
I would say I walked with God as much as I understood it and could. And so, actually, Charlie, I remember talking to my mom once over the phone and saying, "Mom, I have never felt more freedom in my life than I did being behind bars."
That's amazing, yeah.
Because God had so released me from the guilt of my past sins, the forgiveness that He showed me, the grace, right? So I was so excited now about, man, I still have an opportunity to get out of here and make a change and actually live out what I knew God's will was for my life. He got me early enough in my life. I didn't just spend decades of just wandering and squandering,
Reminds me of Paul's experience that he reflects in the letter to the Philippians, how in jail he's telling them to rejoice, and he's rejoicing.
Right.
So
that was what God did in my life, and it was exciting. Yeah. And so, it was a very spiritual experience.
Yeah. So how did that end up? How did you end up just serve your term out?
I did. I spent, it was only a few, 3-4 months left by the time I got to prison. But, as my release date was approaching, the Bible stopped being read as much, I started to think more about just getting out and freedom again. A year is a long time.
Yeah.
To spend locked up.
Well, some of us were locked up with COVID. That's nothing like prison, but I mean, it's a long time to be isolated.
Yeah, that's a good way to relate to it, because that's similar. And so, but what I didn't have, I did get released. My mom picked me up, but I didn't have a real foundation to come back to. I didn't have a network. I didn't have a church. I didn't have Christian friends. All my friends were just the people that I'd known prior to going in, that just partied, and they weren't believers walking with God. So when I got out, I was scared straight for a while. I was on house arrest, so I couldn't do certain things for a while. I was on probation for 4 years. I had to go to NA meetings for 4 years. And so I was trying to play it safe for a while, but eventually I started to dabble back into some of the same things that I did prior to that, just because I think I just didn't know where to go. I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, I have, in my experience, friends that went through drug rehab programs, and they spit them out back in the old neighborhood.
Yep.
And people like me that weren't walking with the Lord at the time just, tempted them and back into the old lifestyle.
Yeah. Yes.
So I know
that
how
was
that
my
goes.
story.
And that's a shame that they don't have a good follow-up.
The great thing about what happened to me after I was released is that I met my wife.
Yeah, I was wondering when she'd get into the picture here.
Yeah, I had, when I went back to visit a friend that I knew prior to going in there, and my wife was there, and with another boyfriend. Hey, so I just kind of stole her from him, but
we're going to hope to hear her side of the story someday, so you better be accurate about this.
Oh,
thing.
That's right. Yeah, I better watch what I say. I was smitten, Charlie. She was beautiful. Our eyes met. And, but my wife we just started to date a couple weeks after that. And you should hear my wife's story. She has an incredible testimony, but she was a teenage mother when I met her. Zachary was 10 months old. But we both were just, this young couple that just were naive and immature and a lot of baggage. She has a lot of baggage. I'm coming into this relationship with all kinds of baggage. So I'm fresh out of prison, so we know where her standards were, I guess. But
Did you take very long to get married?
No, we met, we started dating June 22nd of 1993, and we were married July 9th, 1994. So we were just started dating and married within like a year.
Yeah.
So it happened pretty quick. But we will be married 29 years this July 9th.
Hey, congratulations.
So, yeah,
That's
God is good.
Yeah. And so your marriage has just been a model marriage from day one.
Yes, we've never argued.
Yeah.
We've gotten along
Never
perfectly.
lied.
Yeah, it's like heaven. Oh man, don't get me on that because I don't know how long this podcast is.
Well, we'll do a marriage podcast some
Yeah.
other time, but things didn't go well, huh?
Yeah, so my wife did not know the Lord, and so at the time we met, I was, scared straight and trying to do the right thing, and she was a good girl. She also was a disciplined young lady. She still graduated high school on time, though she had a child. But we brought all our baggage together, and we just, had that same circle of friends, the type of friends that we all kind of hung out with. And so when you bring two young people together with all the baggage and all the struggles, and we didn't know, and Jesus was not a part of her life. And at the time, I kind of left Jesus in prison, so to speak. And so we were we were a mess. We actually split up within 2 months of being married. We split up. We were going to just get divorced, and it was mostly me. I got married in part because I thought, man, I need this. I need to settle down. I need to get serious about life. And I love this girl, but that doesn't necessarily mean that marriage is going to make you grow up. And I was not grown up enough, and so we split up. But we got back together just a few months later, and that was a God thing as well, how that played out in our relationship. But we got back together, and we started to try to go to church. My wife went to church with my mom one Sunday, met a church planting pastor in Indianapolis that was starting a church near the place where we were living. Long story short, this pastor and my wife exchanged information because, and she's unsaved, because he said, hey, maybe I can connect with you guys and blah, 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 meet your husband. And so when she came back home after that Sunday, she told me, hey, this pastor, Tom Grafe, is going to be reaching out to you. And I knew right then, okay, this is going to be a God ordained appointment for me. I kind of knew. I was already sick and tired of struggling. I'm back in the struggle again. I'm down on life. I've been in prison. No one wants to hire a felon. My license was suspended. I didn't have money. I had a girl and we had a relationship, but the rest of my life was still a mess and not getting any better. So I knew God was working. And so that pastor eventually did call me a couple days later. And when the phone rang, Charlie, I knew. As soon as the phone rang, I got chills. I got goosebumps.
Wow.
It's not something typical for me, but I knew right then. I know who this is, and I know why he's calling. And sure enough, we had this conversation. He invited me over to his house that night. And this is where the grace of God just came running in. Because that was the night, I was 21 years old at this point. Sick and tired of being sick and tired. Sick and tired of no joy, no peace, no direction, no purpose. I'm married to this woman, and I'm not doing a good job at that. I am a terrible husband. I'm no kind of father to this young boy that I just now became an instant father to. And I knew I was failing at all these things, and I didn't know how. I just didn't know how to change or how to be different or the path to take, because I just had never been discipled. I never knew next steps. So that pastor that night showed me. He opened up the Bible and showed me why I lacked peace, why I lacked joy, why I was still struggling. And I understood that night that I'm still wandering. I'm still living in sin. I'm still not seeking Jesus in my life. I'm still dabbling in the world and trying to fill voids with the world's means. And that's the night that I got on my hands and knees and I prayed and I surrendered my life to Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
I knew Jesus. He was my Savior, but I never really surrendered to His will, His plan, for my life.
Romans 12:1-2 type of surrender, offer your body a living sacrifice.
Absolutely.
Now just pause there for a second, because there are some people who say, well, you weren't saved until that moment.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't saved until you got down on your knees and surrendered your life.
Right.
But what would you say to people say that view called lordship salvation?
Yeah, it's just not true. I knew Jesus. I understood the gospel. I believed in Jesus. Never once, even through all those Prodigal years, did I ever doubt my eternal security, because I just understood salvation's a free gift.
Mm-hmm.
When you receive Jesus, you have everlasting life, and I never doubted that, thankfully. But for me, Jesus, He wants to rule my life, but obviously, as a believer, I also have a will. I lived out my will all those years. I did what I thought was best, what I wanted to do. I thought fun and excitement and joy and happiness came through these other means, partying. And I mean, the thought of going to church, even as a Christian teenager in my early adulthood, I thought going to church, I mean, yeah, check fun at the door. You could do that, but I just didn't see how that life would be fun, exciting, at all. Mm-hmm. And so it was a lie. I was believing a lie. Mm-hmm. Boy, was I wrong. So,
So this was a real turning point in your life. It stuck.
Absolutely.
After talking to this pastor that night. Now I'm just waiting to hear how Shayla got. I really want to get her story too. Mm-hmm. So we'll hear her full story. But when did she get saved?
4 days later.
4 days later.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
It's because I was so perfect after that.
Yeah, right.
And sinless. No.
Right.
It is cool because I was at that pastor's house till like 3 a.m. Mm. And I came home to my wife a different person. The load of guilt from my previous years of wandering in sin, of the struggle, were just lifted. I just gave him to the Lord. And He forgave me. He cleaned my slate, and I had fellowship with God once again. And it's like all the things that you learn as a kid and all the kind of come flooding back. And it's just like, boy, God just lit my heart on fire. And I was so excited. And she's looks at me.
Did she forgive you for waking her up at 3 o'clock in the morning?
She's probably waiting up for me.
She was.
That was the pattern, waiting up for me to come home. But she looked at me and saw something changed in her husband. She didn't know this person. I had witnessed to her prior to that, but it was from a sinful lifestyle, just, as I'm smoking cigarettes and, trying to share with her the gospel, she's like, so, you can believe in Jesus, and He'll forgive you and you'll be in heaven, but, it's a gift. And I'm like, yeah, it just wasn't believable, for her at the time. I think because I wasn't necessarily living the way that she had grown up thinking that Christians lived.
You might say cognitive dissonance between what she saw and what you were saying.
Yeah, there was a disconnect.
Big term. I've never used it before.
Yeah. Should look into that. But thankfully, God just transformed me. And I was excited and changed. And she saw such a difference in me. She walked down to a payphone. Remember payphones, Charlie?
Yeah, I think I do.
She walked down to a payphone and called.
I remember when they were a dime.
Well, okay.
You don't remember
You got
that.
me on that.
Yeah.
No, it was a quarter.
Quarter.
Here's a quarter. Call someone who cares. And she did. She called that pastor and she said, hey, all right. And this is the way she says it. I know I've got the man of my dreams all of a sudden but I also realized I'm missing something. What's happened that I'm missing? And he said, why don't you come over and talk to my wife and I tonight? She went over, talked with him and his wife, opened up the Bible. They showed her Ephesians 2:8-9, because she always thought that it had to be by works or living a good life, or even speaking in tongues was her background. And never really got it and understood it. So that night, she understood the gospel, and she put her faith in Jesus Christ and became a believer. It's just a beautiful thing.
I wish evangelism was that easy for all pastors.
I know, right?
Can I come over and talk about how to get saved? That's great.
We were ripe fruit, and she was the first convert in that church plant.
Wow.
Back in 1995. And so it was exciting, just exciting stuff. And that's when God really started to get a hold of our lives as I'm now living a surrendered life, saying, okay, Lord, I remember just saying, Lord, whatever you have for me, I want that. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what all that would involve, but I was ready for whatever.
So all your marriage problems were solved at this point?
Yes, absolutely. Man, marriage was still just a real struggle. Again, just because you come to know Jesus, or even surrender your life to the Lord, you still got all the baggage, you still got your history, you still got learned behaviors, temptations. Now we're novices and we're just starting, and now we have a child, and then we had another child, and so it was.
But the thing is when you struggle in marriage as a Christian, at least you have a resource.
Yes,
you have a power that's greater than you that you can go to for help, and God can enable that kind of help. But there's so many marriages that don't have that kind of hope.
Yes,
they turn to maybe secular counselors or something that only feed their problems sometimes. But so at least you have. All Christians always have hope in a marriage.
Absolutely.
So anyway, your marriage did improve to a point where now she's friendly towards you.
Yes.
No, you guys have, looks like from the outside, of a good relationship. So that's great. I'm sure you still have your problems like all of us do. But
we do.
Yeah.
We still have some struggles. We still need the Lord's help every day. We're still growing.
Well, let's talk about your ministry path. So did you jump immediately into... You said you were called back when you were young, and now that's probably a memory coming back to you. And,
yes.
And what kind of steps did you take towards ministry?
So we got involved in that church plant, and we're growing, and Shayla's starting to teach 2s and 3s, Bible stories that she had never learned, So it was exciting times. We were working with youth, but that calling God started to remind me of. But I was hesitant, and I thought, surely God doesn't still want to use me as a pastor, because look at my life. I just lived the last 7-8 years of my life in wanting pleasure, as they say, prodigal son. And I thought, there's no way, And then my wife, she was a teen mom. She just came to know the Lord. So when we started talking about it, she's apprehensive. I'm apprehensive. But what we did is we prayed about it.
About going into full-time ministry.
And I kept saying, Lord, I don't know if this is really what you have for me, but I want to pray about it. And I sought counsel. I talked to my pastor, talked to another missionary friend, and just said, hey, here's our story. Look at all that, we've been through and what we've done. And do you think that maybe God would still call me into the pastorate, the ministry, And every answer we got was absolutely. That's what God's in the business of doing, is transforming lives and using people. And so what I did to test the waters was I enrolled in a Bible course at Indianapolis School of the Bible. It was called Baptist Bible College of Indianapolis, I think, at the time. And I took Old Testament survey, just an introductory class. And boy, did God use that in my life, studying Genesis and just... different Old Testament books. And
I remember the first Bible class I took after living a prodigal life was Old Testament also. And I just say, is there that much in the Bible?
Right.
I was expecting a Sunday school class, and boy, it was so deep. It's amazing how much is there. So when those teachers start teaching, so that whetted your appetite, and
absolutely,
you just wanted to get more and more.
Yeah, I got excited, and I thought, wow. this is great. And so God used it to really solidify that, yes, he still, I remember Romans 11:29. I take a verse out of context, but I remember that verse sticking with me. The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable.
Well, that's a general principle. It's not really out of, it's talking about the Jewish God dealing with the Jews, but it's a general principle that's true for everybody.
Well, it was true for me because I remember reading that and going, just because I run from a call doesn't mean that God hasn't still called and that he doesn't still want to use me. And then the life of Jonah, oh man, just thinking I was studying and reading Jonah 4:1 says, and the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. After he said, I think I'll go the other way. That's what I did. I just so related to that. And God used those things in that journey to remind me he's a God of grace. He's a God of compassion and forgiveness and restoration. And so all along, I just kept following what I felt God was leading me to do in my life. And so we were only in that church plant for maybe a year. And we had the Word of Life local church ministries, Word of Life program for our teens. And Shayla and I were involved in that as youth leaders, and we loved it. And so I learned, Word of Life has a Bible Institute. Wow, that's cool. And so after I had enrolled in that class at the local college, I said, being married with now 2 kids at the time, I thought married people with kids don't go to Bible college. You missed it. You missed the boat.
Doesn't make it easier, but
no.
You can
and
do
so
it.
I remember asking a staff person at that Bible college, and I was like, you don't ever have married people that come to college there. And they're like, oh yeah, we got married student housing. And it blew my mind. I thought, what? And so I got even more excited. And boy, that was another one. So we said, I think this is what God wants. So we raised prayer support from our local church. We had people financially help us so that we could just pick up, move to upstate New York. And that's what we did.
I love Word of Life Ministries. It's a great ministry.
It's fantastic.
I just came back from the Philippines working with them. And so, yeah, I love their heart for evangelism especially. But the Bible schools do influence a lot of people.
That was my experience. Got to learn from Charles Ryrie in person. And Ken Ham came and spoke, and a lot of seminary presidents. And it was just an amazing time of growth and transformation for my wife and I.
And then from there you went into pastoring yourself. Were you on staff first, or did you jump into a senior pastor position?
I did. Well, I went on then to Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. And upon graduation, I went to California. I said, Lord, where are the most sinful, unregenerate people in the world?
Sorry, people in California who are listening to this. He's just kidding.
I'm just kidding. No, but honestly, I wanted to reach people. I wanted to. I didn't want to go, where there's places saturated with churches. I don't want to be in the Bible Belt. I want to go where is a great need. And I knew from a book that I read that statistically, California did have a lot of need. There were a lot of unreached places. So I went out as a church planter to California, my wife, and now 3 small children. And so I was a church planting pastor for close to a year there until I assumed the role of senior pastor at a Bible church out there in Central California. So I did the church planting thing. It wasn't a lot of support there, not a lot of organization. And then a church that I was working with, their pastor resigned. God worked it out. I ended up taking the senior pastor role there at Galt Bible Church.
And then you pastored in Missouri also?
Correct.
Yeah, and then before you came to Texas here.
Correct, yep.
Yeah. Well, we're real happy to have you at Burleson Bible Church.
We are thrilled to be there.
Things are going very well, and I think everybody's tickled to have you there. But we've been mentioning grace throughout the conversation. Grace protected, guided, and so forth. Have you come to appreciate God's grace in a deeper level through your ministry and your past experiences, and even through your study of theology? Because that's what Grace Life is all about. We want to help people understand grace. So,
well, my grace journey started in California because leaving Bible college, you have all your theology in place.
Yeah, right.
You know what you were taught.
You're more than your teachers, you know.
I was a big Johnny Mac fan early on, John MacArthur, and being in California was now closer, and so I even attended a couple shepherds conferences that MacArthur hosts, and I enjoyed aspects of that, but I remember God putting a man in our church that challenged me on some things that I was preaching, particularly in Ephesians 1, about the election of God and things like that. And, I just kind of regurgitated what I was trained with in school, and I didn't really understand certain doctrines, Calvinistic doctrines, the tulip. I didn't understand it. I thought maybe I did. But that man God used in my life to really push me to investigate. And then I had another ministry partner who also was a hyper-Calvinist and lordship guy. And he was espousing the doctrines of grace that's espoused from those ministries. And it became an issue in a church. And so now I had a lot of motivation to figure out what I do believe. And so that began my journey of reading books on it from both perspectives. I talked with other pastors. I had some really good Reformed pastor friends out there, and I just sat down with one of them in particular and said, help me understand how you came to these conclusions about your theology. And I remember coming away from that understanding more how they arrived at those doctrines, but I also understood I don't agree with that. I don't see the same thing in the Bible. And so for the next, 10 years, studying on my own, listening, reading different perspectives, and just reading the Bible and praying, and just the God that I see in the Scriptures is the God of grace. He is the God of unmerited favor, unconditional love. And it just built and solidified what I felt like I already believed through those years, but it just became more and more grounded in my heart and my life and my theology. So it's been an evolution of sorts, but today I feel like I appreciate His grace so much more, especially understanding what we call free grace, so it's been a tremendous blessing to learn and to grow in grace and to understand it, and to become a man of grace, and more gracious and more understanding as God is with us.
Yeah, well, grace is like an unfathomable topic that we can always try to attain to and in our experience. As I think about your life and all that you've been through, I'm reminded of Luke chapter 22, where Jesus warned Peter. I'll just read the verse, 22:31. Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. So I think what you've kind of started to say a little while ago was that your experiences actually don't disqualify you as pastor, but give you more insight and depth so that you can understand people. Like, that's what Hebrews says about Jesus as our high priest, because he was tempted like we are. He understands our weaknesses. And so I think it gives you a stronger edge in pastoring. Am I correct about that?
I would have to agree with that, just in that I feel like that's my mission, is God has forgiven me much. He has restored me so that I can help other people understand just how far-reaching His grace is. That there is no sins that can't be forgiven. You can't get too far from God, beyond His grace.
Well, that's what I was going to close with, and just ask you to. There's somebody listening out there who's feeling like they've really blown it morally, or have gone through something like sexual abuse, or prison, or drug abuse, or a broken marriage. We could list all kinds of things, but they're thinking, can God use me? Is there any hope for me? Is there life after this mess? And can you just close your time by what you would say to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've I've done all those things. I've experienced all those things in a very real way. And so from my experience, I would just say, seek God. Really pursue the God of the Bible, and not maybe our concept of God or who we think God is based on maybe what we've learned in the past or the way we were raised or whatever. We really have to come to seek God and receive His grace and His forgiveness, His compassion, because it's readily available any time. And so there's always hope. There's always hope. And I've experienced it at many different stages of my life, and I still experience it today. And I would say that's my mission. That's kind of my heart, is for the prodigals, for the disenfranchised. I think there's a lot of people out there that do know Jesus. They have believed the gospel. They have understood, and they are born again. But like me, a lot of them weren't grounded. We weren't discipled. Maybe we had a bad experience. Maybe we've had trauma. And Satan wants to sift us like wheat. My testimony early on was from 1 Peter 5:8. The devil is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He wanted to consume me. He wanted to derail me because he knew that any person that understands and lives out God's grace is a danger to him. They're a force for the gospel and for the work of God on the earth. So that's what I'd say is, receive the grace of God. It's freely available. Nothing that we've ever done will ever keep us from His love. But we have to receive it. We have to be open to it. We have to come to Him and receive it.
Amen.
In order to experience it.
Amen. Well, Gary, it's been a great conversation with you and to hear your story. And thanks for being very open and transparent about your life. I think people will relate to that. And we appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Charlie. I really appreciate the invite.
Okay. Well, we're going to hear Shayla's story sometime in the future and see if Gary's matches hers. But anyway, we're glad that you joined us today. And if you want to hear more about Gary his ministry, we'll put your information in the text at the beginning of the podcast so people can get in touch with you if they want to ask you something or contact you for any reason. But some of the things Gary talked about, like Calvinism, Grace Life has a booklet on Calvinism that helps people understand what they're buying into if they are so inclined. And also we have books about the topic of Lordship Salvation. Our latest book is called Let's Share the Good News Clearly. And we just put that out, and it's helping people to understand the gospel of grace clearly. And you can find us on Facebook, join our group Grace Life Ministries, and Instagram. It's Simply by Grace with _ between the words. And you'll find us. We'll have that kind of information always available. But thanks for listening. What you could really do to help this podcast and message get shared is to give us a rating, make a comment, and share it with as many people as you can, because I know that you know somebody that needs to hear what Gary said. They need not only to believe in Jesus Christ as Savior maybe, but maybe they've done that and they just need to come back to Him and surrender their life to Him and live for Him as Lord. So that's another grace story, and we appreciate Gary and God's grace in his life. And we would like to hear maybe sometime what God's doing in your life. So until all here.
Thank you for listening. For more resources, or to help spread the message of God's life-changing grace, visit our website at gracelife.org. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a message at simplybygrace@gracelife.org. See you next time.